If we were living in a normal democracy, I would agree. A resignation would be the right thing to do. The Lebanon that we hope for and that we want to live in is at risk. He did not resign, he was pushed out. The value proposition of Lebanon has completely changed. Today, Lebanon has a true identity crisis. What do we have to offer?
Warlords, what are you referring to?
To me, we are living in an extension of the civil war in a completely different way. We're fighting a losing battle.
I don't know if it's the weather. I don't know if it's just that we're in our element today, but it feels like most of the people in this room, including you, Iman Tabbara, are in a fairly good mood, which I think is a nice way to start the episode. I like seeing you in a good mood.
For a change.
For a change. I should say that I've gotten to know you really around election time, but post-elections as a friend. And you've been on my podcast. We've met many times in person. I insisted on having you on MTV podcast because I think the discussions we have are very straightforward. They're goal-oriented. And I don't think we've ever wasted each other's time and just talking for the sake of talking. So that's why I wanted you here. For anyone who doesn't know you, you're a lawyer by training. You actually ran for elections in May 2022. You're a friend of the National Bloc, but you're an independent politician. You ran in Beirut 2 district. Actually, I had you with Waddah Sadeh in the same episode, talking about things that maybe we can pick up from. You're also involved in the private sector. I think you're a thinker as well, because the kind of conversations we have are not really only local affairs. We go big. So I'll start with the medium. And from the medium, we'll go small, and then we'll go huge. Medium. 8 months or so since elections. 8 months post-politics, the way you were experiencing it, where you're able to go back a bit towards civil society, but you have, in a way, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And I think that's a fair way to characterize your relationship to politics right now without being so visible on the political scene, which I like. It offers some nuance. I've asked this question to other guests, including Ziad Abishakir, who was sitting here last week, whether or not there's a feeling of relief that you did not win. And I don't mean this in a way to criticize you. It's more that we've seen what politics looks like for the 13 MPs representing change. We know what they're going through right now. 2 of our friends are sleeping in Parliament for the better part of over 2 months now.
A bit less.
A bit less, approaching 2 months. And it feels like they're stuck and unable to do much anyway. And I have a feeling that you're able to do more from the outside rather than from the inside, at least right now. Is that a fair way of characterizing where you are? And if not, you tell me, because I'd like to be a bit more pushy this episode.
Definitely when we run for elections, we were hoping to get numbers. We reached numbers that we were not expecting. However, when you ask me, are you relieved that you're not inside? I wish everyone who believes in the morals that we have could have made it, because these 13 who are now 12 cannot change. So I wish we would have been like in our 60s, 70s. This is where the real change is. But when you ask, is it a relief? It's not a black and white kind of question. It's more of it is what it is. So what do we do next? So for these MPs who are honestly full on taking on these responsibilities and practicing what they were preaching, I salute them. Our job now, for those who did not make it, is to basically back them up and see how we can elevate their how they do things, how we can support them, how we can be the back office, and how we can keep moving forward towards the goals that we have set before.
That's a very careful way of not answering the question. Are you relieved to be here with me talking about politics rather than sleeping in Parliament? And I would like to make that black and white.
It's definitely easier for me to be here sitting with you.
Mm.
It's much easier. Is it a relief? We wanted solutions.
Mm.
We're not getting the solutions. So I don't think there's relief in any form, whether in or out. But
Mm.
we need to move forward. So this is how I would view it. It's a completely different angle.
See, the reason I'm being a bit pushy is because I'm actually relieved that you're not in parliament. That's my way of complimenting you. I think, had you been in parliament, you would be not able to do what you were saying, which is practicing what you're preaching. I think you'd be trapped with an issue that's beyond us. Whether it's Ba'abda, which seems to be now a summer affair, or whether it's even local legislation on hold. I spoke to Ziad, not to make it about him, but he mentioned a draft law, an independent judiciary draft law that he's been talking about for years.
Yeah.
Even that kind of legislation, which is backed by some political parties from the opposition, is on hold. It seems like everything is on hold. So I'm
Yeah.
actually relieved that you can brainstorm and come up with ideas outside. I think there's an asset there going back to civil society.
Definitely, civil society has a major role to play right now. Again, have we had been more inside, things would have been maybe tilted, shifted in a completely different way, and we
Mm.
weren't where we are today. So, again, so many things are now on hold, and you feel like we're just waiting for something to tip us over.
Mm.
And it's like we're at a bottleneck, and I'm expecting anything and everything before we reach a new normal. So, or a new setup, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
So, this has been building up for quite some time. And I shared with you that the document, which is called Subversive Ideology, which is very interesting, I found actually, because how people change societies. This is a KGB guy who deflected and who went back to Canada, and he was talking about his how the Soviet Union had plans to, let's say, democratize the U.S. And it goes through 4 stages: demoralization, destabilization, crisis, and normalization.
I'll tell you what, let's save that to the end because
Right.
that's the big picture I
Okay.
want to end it with. But that's
Okay.
going huge.
Yeah.
That's history, that's perspective,
Yeah.
that's something even beyond our own lifetime.
Yeah.
Experiencing the Cold War in its fullest. Was it Thomas Schuman? Is
Yeah.
that the name?
That's his Canadian name.
That's his Canadian name.
Yes.
So we'll leave it with Thomas Schuman at the
Yeah.
end. Allow me, Iman, to push further with a bit of diplomacy sprinkled on top. I disagree with you. There are 13 change MPs, only 2 are sleeping in parliament.
Agreed.
Okay. Had you been 60 or 70, I think that's pretty much what we have right now. There's roughly 65 change and opposition MPs combined. There's only 2 MPs sleeping in parliament.
True.
And had you been sleeping in parliament, I think this is my subjective view, I think your capabilities would be shackled. I extend this to the 2 MPs that are there. I think Najat and Milham should not necessarily be trapped in parliament. But that's how I would characterize their political victory, their election victory led them to paralysis. And that could be maybe something beyond all of our control. All of us are paralyzed in different ways, in or outside. But going back to my way of understanding you, I think you're the kind of voice needed to put pressure from outside right now. I'm extending this compliment in a way that makes sense to me. I'm actually happy Ziad did not win as well.
I view things from a different standpoint. What Milham and Najat are doing is they're trying to open up doors, and not necessarily paralysis, because at this point, what can you do? And they attempted something, and for good or bad, they stuck with it, and this is something that I respect. We have no other alternatives to move things forward. Let us not underestimate the fact that 2 parliamentarians are actually having a sit-in in parliament. This is something that is not to be uh, minimalized in terms of in a democratic life. This is something huge. So, fine, I agree. There are only 2. I definitely wish there were more MPs to push forward with this strategy or this kind of thing, but unfortunately there aren't. We're lucky to have these two, so let's highlight the positivity instead of the negativity on that matter.
That's a fair way of characterizing what maybe I'm being a bit too hard on their predicament, but allow me to flip it on its head. I think they should resign. And I'll tell you why. Resignation, not in humiliation. Resignation with their dignity intact. Unlike someone we both know who did resign, and we know exactly how his political career ended. He resigned too late. He's now a whimper in Lebanese politics. And allow me to go here, Saad Hariri.
Yeah.
He resigned years late. He returned to Lebanon 2 weeks ago or so. I think 2 weeks ago to the day, actually. I was actually fortunate enough to meet him while he was here because I wanted to see it with my own eyes. I wanted to experience this moment with my own eyes. I saw the legacy of a person that stayed too long in paralysis, trying to navigate that ship, and abroad in self-imposed exile, not part of Lebanese politics, not necessarily because he doesn't want to anymore. It could be that the ship has sailed. And I see in the two MPs right now in Parliament and many others, it's not about them, pretending and perhaps even offering pseudo answers as to why things are paralyzed this bad. I think resignation, the sooner the better for retaining dignity. And the reason I say resignation is because what they're doing right now is exactly what paralysis does. It puts good people in Parliament, not allowing them to do anything, and it kills their careers. I actually had this conversation last night with Ziyad Abishakir in a live episode. He's optimistic in a way that I think reflects your viewpoint. He said next round in 2026, he could imagine 60 change MPs winning. I went the other way. I said 0. And it's not their fault. So can you shatter this paradigm for me and say how you see it? And we can go a bit into the Hariri legacy, but not too deep. But I think it's important to reflect on what resignation can offer.
All right. So if we were living in a normal democracy, I would agree. A resignation would be the right thing to do. However, Lebanon is far from being a democracy. All right? So I'd rather have these two MPs who represent me paralyzed inside and me having access to all the shenanigans that Berri and co are doing than to have them outside. I'm outside. I'll do my fair share. I want them inside. That's one thing. Another thing, I don't think Hariri resigned.
What did he do?
He did not resign. He was pushed out, whether internally or externally. He was pushed out.
You're talking about October, November 2019.
I'm talking about everything that led up to that specific moment.
Oh,
Right?
I see. The resignation being a consequence of being pushed
Exactly.
out.
So it's not a willing act. It's a reaction more than an action. Plus, let's not forget that.
I agree.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah.
Let's not forget that what we have is these different islands of sectarian regimes that overlap somehow, and unfortunately, sadly, Hariri was not able to shift that or to change that. So if you can't overtake them, you join them, and this is exactly what happened. At least on his entourage level, which, as me being a lawyer, I know very well all the cases that are brought against people that are very close to his entourage. Now, again, for the next parliamentary run, I think we cannot predict anything. I salute Ziad's optimism. I think today we're living more of an existential issue. The Lebanon that we hope for and that we want to live in is at risk, at high risk, and things can go either way. And I cannot, as much as I'm trying hard to work towards any type of change, like tangible, even low-hanging fruits, today I cannot confirm that this is even possible. It's such an intricate web. I don't know how you can start to detangle the issues, because the issues have been rooted for the past decades. And this is not something that you can do in a sectarian system similar to what we have.
We'll go there. Actually, that actually is a nice segue into the next sections of this discussion. But before we jump into, which is really the bigger terrain, I'd like to reflect a little more on what you said, and I agree. He was pushed out over time, but his resignation was his resignation. That's what I don't want to see to happen to other people. I think it's fast forward now that it's hard to see certain MPs that won 8 months ago able to send that message again. I think the last 8 months, and I'm sorry to say this, symbolic gesture or stunts, they don't matter. They actually have they can backfire immediately when there's no exit strategy. I know that it's too easy just to focus in on two MPs, but maybe they're the most courageous of the 13 in what they're doing, in that the others are doing things on their terms. They've done something which is, I think, rather bold. They took what should work in a normal system, the way you described it, and they're applying standards, better standards, to a Lebanese parliament. And I appreciate the boldness, but I could see, without an effective strategy, without even engaging more people, let's say they have the willingness, they're now MPs, they could engage others than the 13. Let's say the other 11 are not interested. Talk to the rest of the opposition. That, I think, sends a different message, which is they could sleep in parliament until July or August, maybe later, or maybe a little earlier, until the next president comes in. And that, to me, would be an epic failure. It means that all the things that were lining up beyond their control were happening. Their gesture in parliament had absolutely nothing to do with it. Resignation, to me, on an earlier stage, points the finger at the problem better.
I think you all know what the problem is.
Well, we're going to get into this problem.
Let me take you a step back. I don't think it's a stunt. It's an alternative. What other alternatives do we have today? Do we have any? We don't. Milham and Najada have extended their this approach to many of the other MPs. And don't forget that I think 42 signed a declaration that is in full support of what they are doing. However,
42 was not in support of what they're doing. It was in support of Tariq Bitar's position. That document that was signed.
No, that's another document. There was another document that was signed asking the parliamentarians, the rest of the parliamentarians, to abide by the constitution and the rule of law.
Sorry, yes.
And then they were in support of what Milham and Najat are doing, and they all signed it.
It was the same 42, I guess, at the end.
They were 46, I think.
46,
yes,
right.
They were 46, I think. So what's happening, we're being really hard on these change MPs. And I think we are completely disregarding the issue that the main blocks, or michel-el-murr, are those to be blamed. Let's redirect this narrative. We cannot expect 2 MPs or 10 MPs or 20 MPs, for the sake of argument, to turn the tables around. All right? So what we're asking for is for the Hezbollah crowd and the Amal crowd and the flip-flopping Aouni crowd to align. If they are able to align, so be it. We cannot say that we want a democratic process and then do what they're doing. هيدا التعطيل ما بينفع. Okay? So يا أما we abide by what we believe Lebanon should be as a democratic state, or we simply don't. And if they're gonna get someone we don't like, come in, we boycott these jalsat. It's as simple as that. Today we have 0 alternatives and no one cares about us. And unfortunately, the Lebanese population has been used to so much of a superhero coming to save the day and to help us, and no one's coming. We have never been, nor will be again, the focal point of the world. The value proposition of Lebanon has completely changed. We are no longer the hospital of the Arab countries, or the educational hub, or the banking hub, or the tourism hub. I mean, today Lebanon has a true identity crisis. What do we have to offer as a country?
I'll tell you what. You've offered me a way to answer it in a way I have not thought of it, because You mentioned earlier, and we're going to leave it at the end, this demoralization of a population. Anyone, willingly or unwillingly, legitimizing the Hezbollah led paralysis of our politics is doing the wrong thing. I extend this to the groups you mentioned that are sometimes in full alliance, sometimes not, that have survived off of that framework. I also extend it to naive MPs that may think they're doing the right thing sometimes, but are actually maybe not doing the right thing all the time. Naive in the best way possible, not as an insult, more in they're misreading the story. Like somebody in the Soviet Union would be trying to do the same thing. I don't think it's not that I can't blame them for trying, but I think there is room to point the finger better at the problem, and maybe some people are doing that more effectively than others. And I'm not putting a blanket statement on all 13. I think some of the 13 have gone down that road, and some haven't. And maybe
They're no longer 13.
half of the 13, or maybe a little less, have decided that they're better served at pointing the finger more in one direction. I think the rest have fallen into the trap set forth by Hezbollah. And that's where I get worried that politics remains paralyzed for years to come, maybe until the next election cycle. And that's where I see their names not resonating.
Let me counterbalance that.
Yes, ma'am.
So, change is a cumulative approach. In the grand scheme of things, maybe what these MPs are doing is not enough to topple things now, but it may just pave the way towards that. Nothing persists. It's impossible for things to persist. Okay? Even the Soviet Union, such a functioning, living organism with such capabilities, was crumbled to the floor. And I believe, eventually, whatever system we can call here, or I don't know what to call the system, honestly. So eventually it will crumble. Nothing lasts.
Let me ask you, with permission, I want to dedicate a little bit of time to this. Why do you say that? You've lived your whole life, and we're roughly the same age.
Yeah.
I think we're months apart, or maybe a year apart or so. You're 32?
I wish. Maybe a decade ago.
Me too. So we're in our early 40s, I assume. We know the same country. We've gone through the same mess. We know it. We know what the Civil War was like. We know what post-war politics was like. We know what Reconstruction felt like, the good and the bad. We know what 2005 felt like. We know what 2008 was all about. We know assassinations. We know the port blast. We know October 2019, and we know the way it ended. We've lived through the same experience. Our generation saw tragedy, brief prosperity, immense tragedy, collapse. But one thing survived. Not Hezbollah, the system. This system that we talk about day in, day out, survived the Syrians, it survived Hafiz al-Assad, survived Bashar, it survives Iran. Hezbollah is not regenerating, it's not recreating a system. It's actually working in the system, albeit perverting it from inside, and violently demoralizing a population. And I think that's why we think the system is so bad. It's because we've lived through the perverted version of the system for so long. But the system, I think, this is a bet I could make. Let's say Iran lets go of Hezbollah, the unthinkable. The Iranian regime reconsiders its security needs in the region. It reins in Hezbollah's weapons. It says, we don't need Lebanon anymore. I am hell-bent certain the system will remain until we both die. I think it'll start reforming, but the system would survive. Change of system, I can't see it happening. And I see the same Lebanon that you're in, but I always feel that I'm an outsider when I say this. This sectarianism, this language to me means absolutely nothing. I think it's descriptive, and I think it's who we are. We can't blame ourselves for being ourselves.
It's definitely part of our identity. But let me take you back.
Yes, ma'am.
What you were talking about, different instances.
Mm-hmm.
For me, this is only one. This is a long stretch from 69 till today. It has its ups and downs, but this is the same stretch. Why would I expect anything different from the Civil War when the post-Civil War era is being handled by the same warlords? What was for them to sign a constitution and to say I abide by it and to take their place in government? That's not sufficient for me enough to have that actual change happening. So to me, this is from '69 and all the decadence it has, with its ups and downs, and it's ongoing till now. And to me, this is just one block of time, one phase in the Lebanese life. It's not different phases.
I have to take issue, and maybe we can have permission this episode to go a little longer than an hour. I don't know what you're talking about. Warlords, what are you referring to?
كلهم, everyone.
Samir Jaja,
Jaja,
Walid Jumblat
Jumblat.
have not fired one bullet in 33 years.
Fine.
That's not... Wait. The same warlords? Those are the two people that used to kill each other during the Civil War. There are two leaders that used to shoot at each other from the mountaintops. They reconciled their differences in March 14, 2005, became part of a coalition. Jaja went out of jail, and suddenly there's politics the way Lebanon is picking up from the 1960s. That's not warlords doing politics. That's actually post-Civil War ex-militiamen.
No, I disagree. The interests have shifted. What they're looking for has shifted. It's no longer power and territory. It went beyond. It's what's my stake in the government? What's my stake? It's the mode of operandus that has shifted, not who they are. Granted, some have made amends. We're not saying we can treat them as if we were still during the Civil War. They have made amends, but still, I think they need to step away from that picture for us to see real change. It is, for me, impossible to imagine or to envision that someone who has held a gun and killed people and who has butchered hundreds or just one person, for me to ask him to let's rebuild. You cannot do that. You cannot change who you are, or you cannot change how you perceive things. To me, we are living in an extension of the Civil War in a completely different way.
Do you remember growing up in the 90s when we used to talk about reform? And we used to criticize Rafiq Hariri. We would actually be harder on Hariri because he was prime minister. The people that we used to champion for reform were living in Paris. Michel-el-Murr, the former president of this country, spent the better part of 15 years, a little longer, about 15. That was the reformer abroad. You can talk about it in Paris. You can even rally people. You can get kicked out of Lebanon and do that from afar. Weeks after his return, he's entrenched in surviving a system that is designed to either eliminate anyone that talks that language here and does something, but it protects those that work within. I think the militiamen you're referring to from the Civil War, those that tried defying that narrative, one classic example is Samir Jaja. We let it go, but the man spent 11 years in jail.
I told you, he made amends.
That's not a militiaman doing politics.
He made amends.
Walid Jumblat has not been involved in fighting for 33 years. We can criticize him for many things. He's not a fighter anymore. 2008, he's actually in retreat. He's fearing for his life in 2008. That's not a militiaman. That's not civil war. That's one group inheriting the Syrian occupation and now defying all of us. I think Rafiq Hariri, the fact that he was killed in 2005, the fact that his son was unable to do anything in the last 17 years that could put us in a far better direction, none of that is his fault. I don't blame him. But I do sense a lot of people that I've spoken to in politics, many that emerged in the election season last May, they simply don't see it that way. They do blame them for not doing more. I'm certain about this. They do more, they're not part of the scene. They're gone. And I made this gesture to Paul and Tracy Najjar, a man who deserves so much more, a man that deserves a fairness that he's been robbed of.
Yeah.
Put him in Baabda, I'm 100% sure that ammonium nitrate would have been parked in the port against his will. That's what I mean. I don't think of him as bad because he can't do anything about it. And I think if you were prime minister, the same thing would happen. You'd at some point have to make a decision of either paralysis or resignation.
No, I disagree. Because very simply, the concept of مخلونا, this is something I cannot imagine, because we know how this government is split up. We know how there's a play of power. I would understand that there are limitations. I'm not telling you that we're asking anyone to turn this country into a utopia. That's not it. But we're asking where you have access and where you have power, change it to the better. And none of them did. None of them. I'll give you an example. الصناديق المهجرين, صندوق الجنوب, صندوق الهيدا. Was it utilized to the benefit of the people, or was it utilized as a clientelism kind of approach? You tell me. The electricity, مخلونا, طب مخلونا, why did you go down that road to spend, I don't know, they fight over 24 or 40 billion. I mean, at this point, who cares? Okay? This is what I'm telling you. I am in control in my firm, in my law office. I control my files, all right? I cannot tell my client, listen, I messed up because the system is not there. I am responsible. In a way, I am responsible to the extent these limitations allow me to be responsible. So I cannot say مخلونا بقى.
All I can add to this is that some of these people that we know in person, some of them that are maybe we know them less, but that's because they were killed. I think of two names that come to mind. One an economist, both an economist, one a minister of economy and one a minister of finance, that belong to roughly the same ticket, roughly. You have Basil Fleihan, you have Rayal Hassan.
Yes.
Two individuals, one robbed, stolen from this country too soon. I think he was our age when he was killed.
Yeah.
That kind of person would have the same principles you're referring to. If not, he would outshine our expectation of Lebanese politics. And I say that with relative comfort because I actually got to know him better in the months leading up to his death. Look at the other name, Rayal Hassan. I don't think of her as any less than Basil Fleihan. Actually, they're friends. She refers to him as her mentor. Her career ends plummeting the way Saad Hariri's falls. She ends as an interior minister, not even in her natural
Element.
skill set. Yeah. And now she's not part of the political scene. But I don't think of her as any less. And that's, to me, not their fault. I can't blame either one for not doing more. In fact, I think Rayal Hassan's decision to stay in power when things were really heating up was a mistake. She should have resigned. What I really want is the best of us, and I put you in this very, very important shelf. The shining stars of what should be Lebanese politics. I don't want them to end up robbed of their careers because of things that have nothing to do with them. And I think I agree, مخلونا is a cop-out. But that doesn't necessarily mean they can do more. I actually fear that maybe too many that wanted change got that part of the story wrong.
Listen, maybe we cannot turn things to the better, but at least we can mitigate the negative parts. Maybe Raya, if she wasn't a Minister of Interior, things would have gone even worst. We have to always take that option as well,
Mm,
because
mm,
I understand. But again, people who are living in Lebanon and fighting for this Lebanon, or for this idea that we have, for
mm.
this dream, or it's like being in an abusive relationship. Honestly, it's like knowing very well that every day you're gonna wake up and you're gonna get beaten almost to death, and just saying, well, maybe things will change eventually.
You're very nice to let me push you to my limits. And you're always the kind of person that lets me sometimes. I actually, when we end these conversations, I begin rethinking my own assessments. That's credit to you for being able to handle your own abusive relationship with me. Let me switch over to something that's very important, which is the role of the private sector.
Yeah.
Now, I've had this conversation also with Ziad Abi Shakir, but the reason I keep referring to him is because he has that role as well. He takes prototypes from the private sector and tries making them work in the public sector, but
Yeah.
he's a very hands on, very individual driven, shining star in civil society. I'd like to talk about private sector LB. And I
Oh,
know that
yeah.
I said at the beginning you're a lawyer by training. I'm not too familiar with the terrain that you're working on in this field. I'd like you to flush it out as much as you can because I've watched some of the clips and it's all the people I know.
Yeah.
It's the change MPs, opposition MPs, it's many in civil society speaking a language that resonates with me, which is you can't kill the private enterprise of Lebanese
Yeah.
or the skill set, the
Yeah.
creativity. What is your role there and what can you say about it?
So the Lebanese private sector network, it's a network of businessmen and businesswomen, like-minded people, who honestly believe that we need to abide by the constitution, we need to implement the rule of law. We base our approach as a, we're not a think tank, we're more of a lobby group,
Mm.
and we try to network. We're the connecting dots, and like you said, each one of us is somewhere. Uh, we're trying to connect as many dots as we can to
Mm.
have these the same message through different messengers. So what we believe in is two main pillars. One is the economic security. Under that, because honestly, we believe that economy is a national security, and what we're dealing with today is the outcome of our our governments just disregarding the economy completely.
Mm.
So it's built. We are strong advocates of the formal economy, of sovereignty, of a healthy financial system, of e-governments, and the second pillar that we deal with, it's the growth and sustainability, because it's not only enough to have formal economy. We need to grow and we need to reach our full potential. We have such a massive brain drain. It's just unbelievable. And how can we rebuild without these individuals who are just at a certain point? And I understand them and I respect their decision, but they're saying, you know what? It's not worth just wasting my life for a dream that maybe one day things will reshape in this country. So this is what we're doing, and we're trying to reach out to as many similar-minded corporations to see how we can move things forward in the right direction.
May I ask you, and I'm always curious about how you can incentivize these ideas, even when friendly enough laws are in the books, but they're not necessarily implemented.
Yeah,
And for the most part, they're ignored. And I don't want to be too extreme here, but increasingly, this country, in all ways, whether it's security or whether it's just society's well being, it's beginning to feel more anarchic
of course.
than a country, the way we understand what we want from this country. It feels like there's a very unstable, uncertain future. What kind of incentives could this kind of effort provide for the companies that still want to do things the right way? They're filling in a void, which I think, in essence, civil society does well in Lebanon. It steps in when the state doesn't provide. But these are corporations. These are maybe they're more corporate-minded individuals that they want to thrive in an
Of course.
economy that's not really
Yeah.
that's not working well for them. can you explain the incentivization, if that's a word? I don't think that's a word. But how can you encourage that kind of growth when you know the tools are limited?
Yeah. So what incentivizes each and every one of us is the fact that we actually love Lebanon.
Oh,
Honestly.
not good.
No, honestly, I know it sounds like a cliche, but these people are here to stay. These people feel responsible for the hundreds of employees they have. This attachment that we have, again, going back to that abusive relationship, this attachment that we have, it's the legacies that these companies that have been passed on from generations to generation. It's not easy just to, pack up and leave.
Mm.
So this is the incentive. This believing that we deserve to have a normal life. We deserve to go to work. We deserve to pay our taxes and to get something in return. This is you're asking a population that is immensely cultured, highly educated, highly proficient, and uh, that we have so much ambition to settle for قشط الكهرباء تك disjoncteur دبرنا بنزين and all of these things. This is not who we are. It's not in our DNA. Our DNA is here to grow, to build, to branch out, to reach new heights.
Is this more financially? Is this financial support more than anything? I'm trying to see what the incentive is
Yeah.
to actually.
Now the major issue is because there's no clear policies.
Mm.
The government and the parliament have no clear policies on how to move forward.
Mm.
So now, although we're trying we're trying to abide by the law, but to a certain extent, we're trying to, as much as possible, minimize our interaction with the public sector because it is hindering us.
Mm.
Imagine we on when was it Tuesday? They raised the taxes from
Yeah.
15 to 45.
Yeah.
I mean, it does not make sense. Why 45? Why not Sayrafa? Why not the actual price of the dollar?
Yeah.
I mean, the private sector feels like it's, Anna, to me, it's the last standing dungeon, and they're trying to break it down.
I'm not too well versed in this initiative and the grouping, the way it operates, but I've seen a lot of MPs involved.
Yeah.
So is that a public-private initiative that you're trying to get legislation done?
Of course.
So
Of course.
could you expand on this? What I know it's not. It's veering off topic a bit, but what exactly are you doing? If there's something like a prototype or something that offers a way that could make this work. And I'm asking only in, it's not just, I know it's not talking just for the sake of talking. So what are the successes? What kind of networking is being done? I'm really curious on the nitty gritty of it.
So we have a huge project that we're working on and that we're gonna announce in our. We should do it in May. So that's a keystone event that helps growth and sustainability in terms of finding jobs and creating jobs with.
Oh, so it's job creation.
It's job creation at this point.
Okay.
In addition to funding, let me tell you one thing. We met with so many people, with so many hedge funds, EBRD, and all of that, and everyone was very clear. We will not support the private sector unless the government signs an IMF deal.
Oh, okay. So this is now, in a way, lobbying the government to sign on.
No, we're not lobbying. We believe we just publicized our position on the IMF. We believe that an IMF deal is there's no escaping it. All right. However, an IMF deal that is compliant with our constitution, compliant with our applicable laws, because the IMF deal was like, you know what, we have 60 billion, we're just going to cross them out. هدول deposits. خلصت القصة. What we're saying is the constitution states clearly إنه الملكية بحمى القانون, which means إنه property is safeguarded by the law, by the constitution. Therefore, we cannot have a deal that overrides the constitution. And this is where the lobbying comes in.
So the MPs that are at least the politicians involved, are they trying to find a way for this to work? I mean, what is their role here?
Lobbying.
they're the ones
Yeah,
lobbying. I see.
yeah.
So
So
MPs
we're
are
lobbying
mm,
with the MPs, and the MPs are in term lobbying again with the parliament, with the
right.
foreign, with ambassadors, with all of that. Because
Mm,
unfortunately, what's happening today is, I don't know if we can call it the recovery plan of Miati and Saadi Shemi. Um, there are issues, there are serious issues, and the person, l'interlocuteur, who is in charge, is not relaying these issues. And the IMF, at the end of the day, they just don't care about your internal politics and all of that. But at some point, you have to tell them, well, this is doable, this is not doable. And you cannot implement. And that's why the IMF deal has been dragging for the past 3, 4 years. Because no one has the, the guts to say that this is doable, this is not doable. So what they're doing is they tell them, fine, we'll pass a law stating, let's say, I don't know, capital control, and then in the capital control they introduce another thing that it's insanity. And this is where the chaos comes in, because a big part of it is personal interest, and a bigger part is incompetence. And this is the scary part.
would you give me permission to do one more round of where we what's that friendly fire that we exchange? May I ask you one more thing
Sure.
before we wrap it up on the huge issue?
Yalla.
Okay. Saad al-Shami, you mentioned him earlier. Let me add him to the other list. He's not from the same team. He comes later in life, in history. He's an IMF man.
Yeah.
I think that's why he's in power. I would assume that's the only reason this otherwise fairly reclusive politician in Lebanese life who doesn't like attention, who actually I think prefers numbers to interviews. Hasn't been on my podcast. I've offered. He didn't say. I think he gave me a very careful la fik عني. like, and I think that kind of person, regardless of his political persuasion the Lebanese way, forget why he's there, whether or not he's chosen by one individual representing or loosely representing one party, forget all that. He's an IMF guy. I think of him unable to do more because of exactly what I was saying earlier. That's what you get.
I disagree.
And he should resign too.
I disagree, because he is in an executive position. There's a big difference being in the executive and being in the legislative.
But he's the interlocutor with the IMF.
Yeah, but imagine, I'll give you an example of, we thought that too. We thought that Saad al-Shami would actually help us get on the right path. And then things just went out of control, and I don't know why. And this is the issue. I'll give you an example.
It went out of control for the reasons we're talking about. Is that this guy obviously said yes to a job that he was fairly naive about. Either he misunderstood Lebanese politics, or he's such a gentle soul that he thought it's just a matter of doing your job, and almost like these old computer where he
He's
just
not doing his job.
exactly because he can't. I
No,
think the man does not.
no, no.
Okay.
I disagree.
Yeah.
I'll tell you an example. When we started with the IMF
It's the
deal,
first time I've made you take a deep breath.
Hey.
I will.
when we started with the IMF deal, the plan was anyone who has below $500,000, they would magically return it. All right. So as time passed, they brought it down to 100,000. Once we were sitting, and I think that was around maybe last year, in the USG, and Saad al-Shami was giving.
Yes. Yeah.
And he went up, and I don't know if naively he told us that there's a problem with the translation between the Arabic text and the English
I
text.
remember this. Yeah.
And then one of the, it's demeaning when someone talks to you like that. They're insulting our intelligence to a certain point. I mean, and this is something that unfortunately I cannot get over in terms of how his attitude shifted or changed. Anyways, putting that aside, the lost in translation kind of section, and then he was talking about the 100K and all of that, and someone raised their hand, and she was like, and how much would that cost the government now? And the guy was like, around $32 billion. And the lady was like, where will you get this money from? And he was like, we don't know. And I mean, your job is to come up with a roadmap, a recovery. The bare minimum is to allocate. When you have numbers, it's easy to allocate how you will pay them. And then there was the gold issue. We sell the gold
Yeah.
to repay.
Yeah.
So it was just very chaotic and unorganized. And I don't know if because he is being gagged or because he simply is good intention, has good intentions and doesn't know how to play in with the politics. But I mean, you cannot talk with people. Listen, I'm no economist and I don't pretend to understand. Unfortunately, in this country, you have to be an economist, a doctor, now a seismic expert and all of that. You have to by by living day to day. So that approach to to a public role completely discredited all his previous, or maybe we just had high expectations and this is his true reality. I don't know. I personally don't know him. I mean, the IMF is also filled with issues like any organization, so it makes you wonder.
I unfortunately think the answers are not really that complicated. It's that if Saad Shami was doing his job effectively, he would not be deputy prime minister. And doing your job ineffectively in a way that lets you linger is exactly what happens to technocrats who
Yeah,
are hired to do a job that's not political. I don't think of him as a politician.
yeah,
Actually, he's not a politician. Had he been a politician the way
yeah.
we understand it, we would hear much more. We would actually maybe.
I'm sure he would have sugar-coated a lot of things and weaseled his way out of answering so many questions
And
properly.
as somebody who's rarely on TV, I actually think most of the time, not always, he thinks of him. I think he thinks of his role as not politics, just numbers.
Yeah,
Whether it's right or wrong, whether he's getting the whole story right or wrong, or whether he's saying things that are, they sound maybe unintentionally condescending. I
yeah,
don't know what the intention is. I still think that's what you get in this perverted system. But talking about system in and out, let's go huge. And I'm really grateful that you sent me a document about Soviet demoralization, about how every sector of society, the the local, the everything, the economics, the security, the well-being, the psychological traumatization
yeah.
from a Canadian ex-Soviet KGB man.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's his name again? I have his
Thomas Schumann.
Thomas Schumann. Let's go. Let's give a shout out to Thomas Schumann. I actually have this language offer, or I. That's not English. I suggest this language. That's too many podcasts. That's not a sentence. I've suggested this framework to European ambassadors that should know better about the Cold War. Now, I'm being condescending towards them now because some of these ambassadors, if not all at times, keep blaming Lebanese for being Lebanese. And I'll say this in the most diplomatic way. Lebanese politicians should do better, assuming that they can do better. And this is maybe where you would agree with them. It's up to the Lebanese to stand up and reclaim their country. For me, that's blah, 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 blah. And they will all leave their embassies and rotation will begin, and the new ones will say
The same thing.
the same damn story. I don't buy it. I don't subscribe to it. Maybe that's their rule. It's to say something knowing that it's not true. Maybe that's what they're sent here to do. All their op-eds, all their way of explaining local agency, give me a break. Let's go to Eastern Europe. Let's go to Central Eastern Europe the way you sent me a document. Let's go exactly into why protests, politics, economics, psychology, why societies die. Because they're suffocated to death. It's your turn, Iman. Did you send me this document because you knew that it would make me love you? Or is that something that you're beginning to see from your side?
I think what's happening to us and the fact that the Lebanese population re-elected 90% of the parliament as if business as usual was, I mean, to me that was insanity. So I needed to look for answers. And I think this made a lot of sense to me. Because, and again, when I look at this document and you talk about different instances in our, from the day we were born till now, to me, I see one complete segment, uninterrupted, till today,
Mm.
uninterrupted.
Mm.
And I believe that we will be living soon to see that new normalization. This is the new thing that. So to me, this makes a lot of sense how you can demoralize into a population, how you can change the narrative from today with so much misinformation and disinformation. If I sit down and I talk to you with numbers and figures and facts, I cannot get through to you. I cannot. And this is where things get scary, because this demoralizations that we're talking about is irreversible.
Irreversible.
Irreversible. How can you change the minds of people who have been indoctrinated for the past 15, 20, 30, 40 years? It is impossible. It is impossible. And to me, this is where I feel like we're fighting a losing battle. This is what demoralizes me. However, I believe people who were able to leave the country and to get to detangle themselves, to become untangled from this web of insanity, can play a major part in re-putting things or reframing our political life.
Since we don't have too much more time left, Thomas Schumann wrote this from Canada.
Yeah.
He's writing about a society or bunch of countries, not one society, that change not because they're able to do anything about it.
No?
It changes because Moscow changes.
Yeah.
Are you hinting here that
Yeah.
we're waiting for Iran's security needs to change?
Definitely.
So that's the message, that do what you can, do your best with what you're given, but that the story doesn't really ultimately change until the regional security changes.
Yes.
That's music to my ears, Iman.
No. Look, the way I see it is these are the limitations I'm talking about. I do what I can in the hopes that things fall into place and then we can restart.
Mm.
In the meantime, what can we do? Because for me to stay in the country and not do my fair share is simply insane.
Mm.
If I'm going to be battered and beaten on daily basis, might as well do something about it or just leave. And for now, I don't plan on leaving. So I'll play my part. And each one of us has to play his part. And this is hoping that things in the area would change and we would live on to see a Lebanon that looks and feels and like us.
You know, I'll wrap it up by saying two things. The first episode I did with MTV Podcast was with Nadim Shhadi.
Mm.
You said earlier you're not an economist, but like everyone here, you have to talk about everything. And you mentioned even seismic experts, earthquake experts are now on the they're being circulated. He's not a psychiatrist, but he wrote a piece about a population that's traumatized over time. And I heard his piece when you were describing, in a way, demoralization and that whole piece about Soviet intrusion and suffocation. I kind of think that over time, it's good to have this huge perspective as wide as possible to remember that even though both of us were not alive in 1969, there is something that worked back then.
We had a decade, a golden decade.
Golden decade. And even in my other episodes on my own podcast, I've heard people that I wouldn't expect saying this, that yeah, there was a decade where things were okay.
No, we had a decade where we were thriving. A simple decade, and we were able to do miracles with it. So imagine how much we can do in such little time if we are given the chance.
I share that sentiment fully. That golden era, in quotes, I think is where all of us should learn from, and there's a template for every discussion that happens around Lebanon. I agree with you, and I want to say one last thing. I've done episodes with you where I'm the one being timid and shy, and you're fired up and you're ready to go to war. This time I was a bit fired up. I was maybe taking advantage of knowing you better and better, that I'm more comfortable doing this. Thank you for being patient. Thank you for letting me challenge you. This means a lot to me. All these notes are the things I take home with me, and I remember what we talked about. I reflect when I speak to you. So for that reason and more, thank you, Iman Tabbara, for joining MTV Podcast.
Always a pleasure.